They had been conditioned to expect the worst from their American captors, a brutal end filled with torture, starvation, and the complete loss of dignity. Yet, when the first Japanese prisoners of war arrived at Camp McCoy in 1944, their spirit was broken not by violence, but by something they could never have anticipated: Hamburgers and Coca-Cola. For men who had prepared for death, the shock was not the capture, but the unexpected reality of survival. As the heavy doors of the train slid open into the harsh Wisconsin winter of 1944, a group of Japanese soldiers descended into a world of biting cold and blinding white snow. The men were shadows of the soldiers they once were, their uniforms in tatters and their bodies gaunt. The signs of prolonged hardship were etched onto their faces, from sunken cheeks and exhausted eyes to lips cracked by dehydration and malnutrition after weeks of transit. From their first day of training in the Imperial Army, a single doctrine had been drilled into them: capture was an unthinkable shame, a fate worse than death itself. Propaganda had painted a vivid picture of American cruelty, and they steeled themselves for the final, violent humiliation they believed was moments away. What they encountered, however, was a scene of bewildering order. The camp was a collection of simple wooden barracks set against the snow, watched over by guard towers and enclosed by barbed wire. But the atmosphere was one of impersonal routine, not sadistic rage. Trucks moved along cleared roads, and the air carried a rich, savory aroma from the mess hall chimneys, a smell entirely foreign after months of subsisting on thin, watery soups. The men exchanged furtive, nervous glances, most keeping their heads down to hide the flicker of confusion and curiosity. American guards issued commands in rapid-fire English, their tone firm and authoritative, but lacking the cruelty the prisoners had been braced for. Interpreters relayed the simple instructions to line up and move forward in an orderly fashion. The presence of officials from the International Red Cross, standing on the sidelines with clipboards, was perhaps the most jarring sight. In Japan, they had been told that America was a nation of barbarians who ignored international law. Yet here were neutral observers, tasked with ensuring that established rules of warfare were being followed. The intake process that followed was methodical and, in its own way, deeply humane. The men were processed to remove lice. Their tattered uniforms were taken to be burned, and they underwent medical examinations to assess their condition. One soldier, nursing an injured arm, steeled himself to be ignored or treated roughly. Instead, an American medic carefully inspected the wound, cleaned it, and applied a fresh dressing. The soldier remained motionless, his mind struggling to reconcile this simple act of care with the monstrous image of the enemy he had been taught to hate. One prisoner murmured to another, "Why are they doing this? We are their enemy. We are less than nothing." His companion could only shake his head, whispering, "This has to be a trap. Just wait." This undercurrent of fear persisted as the men were guided through the camp. Every step was taken with the expectation that the kindness was a prelude to the torment they had been promised. But with each passing hour, the reality of their situation became stranger. They were being treated in accordance with the 1929 Geneva Convention, an international treaty their own nation had signed but not ratified. After being registered, they were led to their new living quarters. The snow crunched beneath their boots, and the wind sliced through their thin clothing. But the barracks they entered were heated by stoves. Inside were rows of bunks, each supplied with clean mattresses and thick wool blankets. This was not freedom, but it was warmth and shelter. As some men hesitantly sat on the bunks, the simple comfort felt unreal. It was a stark reminder of their captivity. Yet it was impossible to ignore the profound difference between this regulated environment and the brutal dungeon they had envisioned. The deep contrast between their expectations and their reality began to create a profound internal conflict. They had been raised in a warrior culture where surrender was the ultimate dishonor, a complete forfeiture of one's identity. Here at Camp McCoy, however, their first day was defined by images of unexpected decency: a guard helping an unsteady prisoner to his feet, a medic tending to wounds, and a Red Cross official ensuring the fair distribution of supplies. The prisoners remained wary, their suspicion a constant companion. But that night, as they lay on actual cots beneath warm blankets, a disquieting thought took hold. The greatest shock of their capture was not the imprisonment itself, but the fact that it bore no resemblance to the nightmare they had prepared for. For these soldiers, this first day was the beginning of a psychological unraveling, and the most powerful blow was yet to come, delivered on a mess hall tray. The following morning, the prisoners were awakened not by kicks and curses, but by the familiar sound of a bugle call, the same one they had heard in their own army camps. For a brief, disorienting moment, some forgot where they were. The clatter of boots and the sound of English voices quickly brought them back to the reality of their situation. After lining up for roll call, they were marched toward the mess hall, their apprehension growing with every step. They fully expected to be given scraps, if they were fed at all. Hunger had been a constant presence on the Pacific Front, where dwindling supplies reduced meals to little more than watery rice and the occasional pickled vegetable. Meat and sugar had become distant memories before they were fed. However, another procedure took place. The prisoners were assembled in a large hall where a Red Cross official, speaking through an interpreter, outlined their rights under the Geneva Convention. He explained that they would be provided with adequate food and housing, allowed to correspond with their families, and would not be subjected to abuse. Their labor would be regulated, and neutral observers would conduct regular inspections to ensure compliance. These words were met with a wave of silent disbelief. Some men stared at the floor, a sense of shame washing over them. Others whispered among themselves, certain it was a lie. "They talk of rights," one soldier muttered, "but we are their prisoners. What reason would they have?" The interpreter waited for the room to quiet before continuing. "These are not promises," he clarified. "These are the rules they must follow. They apply to all of us." The statement hung in the air, heavy with implications. After the briefing, they underwent another round of medical examinations, this time even more thorough. A doctor took their blood pressure, inspected their teeth, and noted their weight. The evidence of widespread malnutrition was clear, but the American staff recorded the data with professional detachment, not scorn. A corporal then distributed vitamin tablets, a gesture of preventative care that was so unexpected it felt almost like an insult. The men were receiving better medical attention as prisoners than they often had as soldiers. Later that afternoon, they were issued new clothing, simple, durable uniforms with the letters PW stenciled on the back. For men who had been living in rags, the clean, well-fitting garments were a welcome comfort, though for some, putting them on felt like another step in the surrender of their identity. The behavior of the guards also continued to defy expectations. While they remained strict and vigilant, they managed their duties without cruelty. When an older prisoner lost his footing on an icy patch, a nearby guard instinctively reached out and helped him up, offering a simple nod before moving on. The act was so contrary to their indoctrination that it left the men deeply confused. That evening, the barracks were filled with hushed, anxious conversations. "How can this be?" one man asked the darkness. "They follow rules as if this were some kind of business arrangement." "Don't they hate us for the war?" his friend replied grimly. "It's a performance, designed to make us lower our guard." Yet, as silence fell, the rich smell of cooking food once again drifted from the kitchens. It was a scent of substance and fat, a world away from the thin, sour broths of the island campaigns. Their bodies reacted involuntarily, their stomachs growling in betrayal. It was becoming clear that the Americans did not view food as a weapon to be withheld, but as a simple part of a daily routine. For the Japanese soldiers, who had endured starvation in jungles and caves, the smell alone was a form of psychological torture. Some buried their faces in their blankets, trying to block it out, while others whispered that the deception would surely be revealed the next day. But the next day, the routine continued, methodical and unbroken. The lines formed, the trays were distributed, and the inspections took place and schedule. The rules, it seemed, were real. The slow, dawning realization that America, even in the midst of a brutal war, operated on a system of order was profoundly unsettling. Yet, this adherence to procedure was nothing compared to the culture shock that awaited them in the mess hall, where a simple hamburger and a bottle of soda would challenge everything they thought they knew. The line shuffled forward, the sound of boots echoing on the concrete floor. Steam billowed from the serving counter, carrying a smoky, heavy scent that was completely alien to the prisoners. It was meat, but of a richness and quantity they had never encountered. Holding their metal trays, they braced for the expected humiliation, for scraps to be thrown at them with contempt. The gnawing hunger made the wait feel endless, but a deep-seated fear kept them from showing any eagerness. Then, the first man reached the counter. An American cook, with his sleeves rolled up, used a spatula to place a thick, hot beef patty on a soft bun, adding a scoop of golden fried potatoes to the side. He then grabbed a chilled glass bottle, popped the cap with a hiss, and set it on the tray. The prisoner stared at the meal, his hand trembling as he accepted it. "Keep it moving," the cook said, his tone neutral. The soldier moved away, his eyes still fixed on the food. Others in line leaned forward, whispering in astonishment as they saw what was being served. "It's meat." The word passed down the line. "They are giving us real meat." As more trays were filled, the sense of disbelief grew. In the dining area, the men sat at long wooden tables, regarding their food with suspicion, as if it were poisoned. A few cautiously lifted the Coca Cola bottles to their lips. The sudden, intense sweetness was a shock, followed by the unfamiliar sting of carbonation. Some coughed and sputtered, while others' eyes widened in amazement. One man let out a sudden, loud laugh that broke the tense silence, while another quickly covered his face, his shoulders shaking with a mix of laughter and tears. A gaunt soldier, whose ribs were still visible beneath his new uniform, picked up his hamburger with both hands, as if it were a precious artifact. He sniffed it, then took a hesitant bite. The richness of the meat and fat was overwhelming. He chewed slowly, his expression a mixture of bliss and sorrow, as if trying to commit the sensation to memory. Tears streamed down his face. His neighbor gently nudged him. "Are you okay?" The soldier struggled to swallow. I had forgotten what fat tasted like. At a nearby table, a quiet debate began. "This is a trick to make us soft," one prisoner insisted. "They feed us well, so we lose our will to fight." His companion responded thoughtfully. "Or maybe this is just how they eat every day." The latter idea was almost more disturbing than the first. The hall was filled with the sounds of men eating, punctuated by quiet laughter and quickly stifled sobs. For these soldiers, who had survived the brutal attrition of Pacific Island campaigns, this meal was not just sustenance. It was a profound cultural and psychological blow. The sweetness of the soda, as one man later wrote, felt like something that did not belong in a world at war. To the American staff, this was just another meal. They ate the same food as part of their daily routine, giving it no second thought. For them, Feeding the prisoners was a logistical task. For the prisoners, it was a moment that shattered their perception of reality. What struck them was not just the abundance, but the sheer normality of it. This was not a special feast designed to impress or mock them. It was just a regular dinner. The fact that their enemy, a nation they had been told was decadent and collapsing, could afford to feed its captives better than the Japanese Empire fed its own soldiers, was a source of deep and painful shame. Yet, alongside the shame was an undeniable sense of relief. When the meal was over, the prisoners sat in a stunned silence, their empty trays and bottles before them. Guards soon directed them back to their barracks, but the whispers continued long into the night. The memory of the Hamburger and Coca-Cola was more than just a memory of a meal. It was tangible proof that their enemy inhabited a different universe, one where such luxuries could be casually given to prisoners of war. This was only the beginning of their education. As they settled into the routines of Camp McCoy, they would be forced to confront the complexities of life as a captive, where order, boredom, and unexpected moments of humanity would test the very foundations of their beliefs. The profound shock of that first American meal lingered, but it could not erase the daily reality of their imprisonment. Every morning at Camp McCoy began with a roll call under the watchful eyes of guards in towers, their rifles a constant reminder of their status. The perimeter of barbed wire was a stark line drawn between their current life and the world outside. Within these confines, a predictable routine governed every aspect of their existence. After breakfast, the men were organized into work details. Some were tasked with clearing snow, others with cutting timber for firewood, and some were even sent to work on local farms under supervision. The labor was consistent but not designed to break them, a fact that surprised many. They were even paid a small wage in camp scrip, which could be used at the post exchange to buy small comforts like soap, stationery, candy, or cigarettes. One afternoon, a soldier stood holding a chocolate bar he had just purchased, his hands shaking slightly. "Back home," he said to a friend, "this is considered medicine, a luxury. Here, they give it to everyone as if it were nothing." The canteen itself was a source of constant amazement. The prisoners would watch American soldiers casually buying sodas and chewing gum, their easygoing manner a stark contrast to the grim realities of the war being fought thousands of miles away. It seemed impossible that a nation engaged in a global conflict could possess such an inexhaustible supply of goods. This structured and predictable life began to exert its own kind of pressure. The constant struggle for survival that had defined their existence was gone, replaced by a deep, grinding monotony. With their minds no longer consumed by combat, they had time to think. And with that time came an overwhelming sense of homesickness and loss. Letters became their only connection to the world they had left behind. The camp permitted them to send a limited number of censored letters and postcards each month, and the men would spend hours carefully composing their messages. For many, simply writing "I am alive" was a monumental task. The replies they received, if any, were precious treasures. For those who heard nothing, the silence from home grew more painful with each passing week. In the evenings, the camp offered English classes. A small number of prisoners attended, driven by curiosity, slowly repeating the new words their American teacher taught them. Others scoffed at the idea of learning the enemy's language, but even they would listen from their bunks, the unfamiliar sounds of the words catching their attention. Small moments of human connection sometimes broke through the routine. During a work detail, a guard asked a prisoner through an interpreter if he missed eating rice. The prisoner gave a bitter laugh. "Rice is just a memory now," he replied. When the guard heard the translated response, he fell silent. The simple answer conveying a depth of loss he seemed to finally understand. Not all guards were so thoughtful. Some remained cold and distant, their interactions limited to harsh commands. Tensions also simmered within the prisoner community. The barracks became a debating ground between those who clung fiercely to the belief in Japan's ultimate victory and those who, having witnessed America's industrial might firsthand, had begun to accept the possibility of defeat. One night, an argument erupted. "You dishonor the emperor when you speak of defeat," one man yelled. "You dishonor the truth by ignoring what is right in front of us." Another shot back. A guard quickly put an end to the shouting. But the underlying conflict remained. The war was no longer just on the battlefield. It was being fought within their own minds. Amid the monotony and internal strife, small routines of ordinary life emerged. Men would pass the time by carving small wooden figures, organizing simple games, or just sitting together and sharing stories of their homes. The smell of food from the mess hall remained a constant, powerful reminder of their situation. But the reliability of 3 meals a day provided a sense of stability they had not known for years. In the quiet darkness of the barracks after lights out, a question would sometimes be whispered. "What do you think our families are eating tonight?" No one ever answered. Daily life at Camp McCoy was a strange and disorienting existence, a state of limbo where physical survival was guaranteed. But their sense of purpose had vanished, and as time went on, they began to see something even stranger behind the fences and regulations. Fleeting moments of connection were starting to form between them and their captors. For weeks, the camp operated with mechanical precision. The prisoners followed orders. The guards enforced the rules, and the daily schedule was unwavering. But within this rigid structure, small, unplanned moments of humanity began to emerge, challenging the simple definitions of friend and foe. The most common bridge was language. With few shared words between them, communication was often a matter of gestures and improvisation. A guard pointing to a shovel and saying, "Work," would be met with a prisoner quietly repeating the sound. "Waku?" A small, shared moment of learning that sometimes ended in quiet, self-conscious laughter. During an evening English class, an instructor wrote family on a blackboard and asked for a volunteer. One prisoner stood and haltingly pronounced it, "Famirai." The room filled with gentle, good-natured laughter, and the instructor smiled along with them. In that moment, the prisoner was no longer just an enemy soldier, but a man trying to learn. And the shared smile briefly erased the divide between them. Food also served as a medium of exchange. Guards on work details would occasionally share cigarettes or offer pieces of chewing gum. The gum was a novelty to the Japanese men, one of whom famously chewed it for a while before swallowing it, much to the amusement of the American soldiers who then tried to explain its purpose. These small offerings became a simple ritual, an acknowledgement of a shared, basic humanity. Not all interactions were positive. On a nearby farm, a group of prisoners was clearing a field under the watch of an American farmer whose son had been killed in the Pacific. The farmer's resentment was palpable. When a prisoner bent down to retrieve a tool, the farmer spat on the ground near him. The guard overseeing the detail saw the act and, without a word, moved to stand closer to the prisoners. A silent but clear message. The farmer turned away, muttering that they should have been left to starve. The story of the incident spread quickly through the camp, a sobering reminder that the rules of the camp did not always reflect the feelings of the people outside it. Not all Americans are the same, one prisoner observed that night. They are like us. Some are capable of hatred, and some are not. Remarkably, friendships sometimes began to form in this unlikely environment. A young guard from Illinois named Miller would often linger by the barracks after his shift, sharing photos of his family with the prisoners who gathered by the fence. They couldn't understand his words, but the images of his parents and sisters were universal. In return, The prisoners would sketch pictures of their own families and homes in the dirt. One evening, Miller pointed to his photos and slowly said, "Mother, father." A prisoner understood, touched his own chest, and replied with the Japanese words, "Ha ha! Chichi." It was a brief, simple exchange, but it was a conversation across an enormous divide. Despite these moments, deep-seated cultural loyalties and suspicions remained. For many Japanese soldiers, their devotion to the emperor was absolute, and they viewed any fraternization with the enemy as a form of betrayal. Those who attended English classes or shared a laugh with a guard were sometimes accused of losing their honor. In his private diary, one prisoner wrestled with this conflict. "We were told the Americans were beasts, but they treat our wounds and share what they have. Which story is the lie? And which is the truth?" For some, the kindness they received was a source of humiliation, a constant reminder that they were living better as prisoners than their own families were in a war-torn Japan. For others, it was an uncomfortable but undeniable realization that their enemy was made up of individuals, not monsters. One snowy evening, a prisoner turned to his bunkmate in the dark. "If we make it through this war, what will we tell our children? That the enemy fed us, gave us warm blankets, and smiled at us." After a long silence, his friend replied softly, "We will tell them the truth, no matter how much it shames us." But the truth was becoming increasingly complex, and as the war neared its end, the internal conflicts at Camp McCoy grew, forcing the men to confront the true meaning of loyalty. By the winter of 1945, life at Camp McCoy had fallen into a rhythm that would have been unimaginable to the prisoners upon their arrival. The signs of starvation had faded from their faces, and the daily work provided structure without breaking them. They sent and received letters, and some were even learning basic English. On the surface, their lives were stable, but beneath this veneer of normalcy, a deep-seated conflict was intensifying with each passing month. How were they to reconcile the humane treatment they received with the unwavering loyalty they were expected to maintain for their homeland? Heated debates became a nightly ritual in the barracks. Some prisoners argued that the Americans' kindness was a sophisticated form of psychological warfare, designed to erode their fighting spirit. "Don't let them fool you," one man declared one night. "The emperor demands our strength, not our comfort. Every good meal you eat is a betrayal of those still fighting." But others, worn down by years of suffering, saw it differently. "We are still alive." Another prisoner countered, "What good did dying of starvation on a forgotten island do for the emperor?" His words were met with a heavy, shamed silence. News from home only sharpened these contradictions. A prisoner who received a letter describing his family's struggle to survive on boiled weeds felt a profound sense of guilt as the smell of roasting meat wafted from the mess hall. The chasm between his life in captivity and their life under constant air raids was almost too much to bear. "I am treated like an honored guest," he confessed to a friend, "while my own children starve." Even the simple comfort of warmth became a source of anguish. Sitting in heated barracks, wrapped in wool blankets, the men were haunted by thoughts of their families shivering in homes with shattered windows. Their safety as prisoners only deepened their sense of powerlessness and guilt. Some clung even more desperately to the state propaganda they had been taught, repeating the familiar refrains about America's imminent collapse. But the evidence of their own eyes made a mockery of those claims. The camp was a microcosm of American abundance, with a seemingly endless supply of everything from Coca Cola to cigarettes. Work details outside the camp revealed a countryside filled with thriving farms, modern tractors, and barns overflowing with livestock. This was not a nation on the brink of starvation. The psychological toll of these contradictions was immense. One evening, a prisoner admitted through tears, I was taught that Japan was the most powerful nation on Earth, the center of the world. Now I see we are just a small island. His friends quickly silenced him, warning him against such treasonous talk. But the thought had been spoken aloud. Religion offered another complex layer. While some prisoners held tightly to their Shinto and Buddhist traditions, others observed the American chaplains with a mixture of curiosity and respect. They did not understand the Christian hymns, but they recognized the universal human need for faith and hope. The regular inspections by the Red Cross became a particularly painful exercise. When asked if they were being treated well, the men almost always answered truthfully that they were. But afterward, a wave of shame would wash over them. To admit that their enemy was treating them more honorably than their own government could feed its people was a deeply painful confession. One afternoon, a group of local children approached a work crew, their faces bright with curiosity. One little girl bravely offered a candy bar through the fence to a prisoner. The soldier froze. He had faced down machine guns and artillery, but this simple gesture of kindness from an enemy's child left him terrified. He slowly took the candy, bowed deeply, and managed a quiet, "Thank you," that night. He told his friends that the little girl's smile had broken him in a way that no battle ever could. "How can I be expected to hate her?" he asked. These moments did not erase their loyalty to Japan or end the war raging within their hearts, but they blurred the lines between friend and foe, creating a moral complexity that propaganda could not explain away. As 1945 wore on, and news of devastating bombing raids on Tokyo trickled into the camp, the contradictions of their existence only grew. Inside the wire, they were safe and fed. Outside, their nation was burning. Their captivity, however humane, was temporary, and they were all haunted by the same terrifying question: what would happen when they were finally sent home? By the summer of 1945, the news from the outside world could no longer be contained. Glimpses of American newspapers and rumors from the guards confirmed that the war was reaching its devastating climax. Allied forces were closing in, and Japan's cities were being systematically destroyed by firebombing. Then came the news of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The prisoners did not understand the science of an atomic bomb, but the sheer horror of the event was unmistakable. Soon after, the final, unthinkable truth arrived. The emperor had announced Japan's surrender. The news descended upon the camp with a crushing weight. The men reacted with stunned silence, quiet tears, or vacant stares. Their entire worldview, built upon the belief in their nation's invincibility and the virtue of death before dishonor, had collapsed. Now, defeat was a reality, and they had been forced to witness it from behind barbed wire, helpless and ashamed. In the days that followed, an eerie quiet settled over the camp. The American guards did not celebrate or gloat. They simply continued their duties with the same impersonal efficiency. For the prisoners, this lack of reaction was almost as painful as the defeat itself. "They treat us no differently," one man whispered. "It is as if they do not even see the depth of our shame." The camp's focus had already shifted to repatriation. The Red Cross began compiling lists and organizing transport. The men were issued new uniforms and underwent final medical exams for the long journey home. They were no longer soldiers of a proud empire, but the surviving remnants of a defeated nation. Their departure was quiet and somber. As they filed out of the gates for the last time, many looked back at the barracks and wire fences. It was not a look of fondness, but of profound confusion. This place, which they had entered expecting cruelty, had instead shown them a world of unexpected order and baffling kindness. The voyage across the Pacific was fraught with anxiety. The men huddled together, speaking of what might await them. They knew their country was in ruins, their families scattered, and that they would likely be seen as cowards for allowing themselves to be captured. The guilt they carried was immense, but it was intertwined with the indelible memory of their time in America. In a small notebook, one prisoner wrote, "I believed my enemy would destroy me with his cruelty. Instead, he disarmed me with his kindness. The taste of that first meal will follow me home forever." Their arrival in Japan was a devastating confirmation of their fears. The cities were vast landscapes of rubble and ash. Their families greeted them with a mixture of tears, relief, and sometimes quiet resentment. They learned of relatives who had perished in the bombings, and of those who had survived on nothing but weeds and tree bark. As returning prisoners, they faced suspicion and were often ostracized for their perceived dishonor. They carried with them a story that no one at home wanted to hear, a story of an enemy who fought not with rage, but with rules, hamburgers, and Coca Cola. In the years that followed, most of these men never spoke of their time in American POW camps. The memories were buried under a lifetime of rebuilding and quiet shame. A few, however, would cautiously admit that their experience had forced them to see their former enemies as human beings. The legacy of places like Camp McCoy is not measured in battles won or lost, but in those quiet, disorienting moments when humanity defied the logic of war. For these prisoners, captivity revealed an uncomfortable truth that decency can exist even in the darkest of times. That is perhaps the most enduring lesson of their story. Wars end and empires fall, but the small, individual acts of compassion, a shared photograph, a piece of candy, a simple meal, can leave a more lasting impact than the grand strategies of generals. For these Japanese soldiers, the taste of a hamburger and Coca-Cola became a symbol of their survival, but also of a world more complex than they had ever imagined. It was a reminder that mercy can sometimes be a heavier burden to bear than hatred. As one of them later told his son, "In America, I learned that you can fight cruelty, but kindness you carry with you forever. War may strip a person of everything, but it cannot extinguish the power of our shared humanity."